Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group, this time with our roundtable with our partner, the Veterans Legislative Voice. Today is Saturday, April 15th, 2023. April is Sexual Assault, Minority Health, and Autism Awareness Month. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. We also have our status producer today, that is Kaya. Kaya today is holding it down in the studio, doing a great job, also a studio engineer. And we have Miss Stephanie Kalota, U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant, First Class. She's a veteran and the co-founder and creator of the Veterans Legislative Voice. How you doing?
Doing great. Hey, I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here again.
So the DC Military Sexual Trauma Reform and Reproductive Health Hill Day Conference, you went to that. Tell us about that.
It's coming next week.
Next week.
It's next week. And so that's coming up. We're going to be doing a lot of meet and greets with various legislators. Senator John Tester, for one. He's the chairman of the Senate Committee of Veterans Affairs. Mm-hmm. And so we get to do a great sit down with him. We're hoping to go and meet a few others. I'm personally, hopefully, I'm going to make it to the appointments for my two senators, Senator Rubio and Senator Scott. And yeah, we're going to talk a lot about military sexual trauma, but also reproductive health, because those often overlap. And since this month is Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Awareness Month, we really want to try to hit that home for everybody.
So have you ever done one of these types of events where you've gone to D.C. to talk to different senators and congressmen and try to lobby for certain issues you want to bring out? Have you ever done that before?
Yes, actually, we did this last September for mostly just reproductive health, because everything was going on with the Dobbs decision, and also the VA changing their interim rule to allow providers for abortion counseling, and also to provide abortions for those that are pregnant as a result of rape, incest, or at a risk of their health because of their service-connected conditions.
And explain to us what that process is like. So when you go fly into DC, you go to DC and you have appointments set up to go meet with these different people, set times. Mm-hmm. What is that process? How does that unfold? 'Cause I did this with the IDPH a few weeks ago, and it was eye-opening experience for me as to what that process looks like. So for someone who's never done that before, what is the process like? What happens?
Okay, so we partnered with the National Women's Law Center, and they have been doing a lot of the go-between of getting all the appointments done. They have really great contacts there. So those wonderful ladies are setting up most of the logistics for us. But when we do go there, we sit down with staff. We make sure that the staff understands where we're coming from and also what their background is. Because first, when you're going to tell them about something, especially the military or about veterans, you need background to understand what you're about to talk about. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of backstory, a lot of baggage, and things to go in to try to help people understand where they're coming from and why these things are needed. I do want to encourage anybody listening, you can do these type of things by calling up your elected officials, calling them and asking for an appointment. You could do it over Zoom, you could do it over the phone, you could do it in person if you want, and you sit down and you tell them what laws that you want passed. I mean, if there's bills that are already submitted and already introduced, you tell them why you want this thing passed and why it's important to you, and then follow up with writing down a personal statement of how passing this bill would affect your life. Because often these legislators will submit those stories into the record, and that's saved at the Library of Congress, but also with everybody else so they can see and understand what's going on behind that. So we do try to do that exact thing when we're there in person. For myself, I have a big background with military sexual trauma, because I was a sexual assault response coordinator for Engineer Brigade at the same time that they were allowing women to complete combat engineer course, which is a combat MOS, only one of the few that was in the Army Reserve. And we were getting women in places that used to be exclusively men. So we had to do a lot of training and having people understand what's legal and what's not, and how to avoid these type of situations, and then how to report and how to do those things. So with my intimate knowledge of that process, sharing the good and the bad of that time frame with them, and especially with stuff that haven't changed, it gives them a backstory and where to go for the next bills and the next laws that can come out.
So I think it's amazing that a lot of people I think don't realize is that anybody in the country pretty much can just, call up or schedule an appointment. And then when you go out to D.C., or if you have an appointment with them over Zoom or over a teleconference, you can actually express your concerns about any legislation that's pending or any legislation that's been introduced to Congress.
Yes, and you can ask them, hey, I'm looking for a bill that is about this subject, and oftentimes they can find it much quicker than you can, because it is a little complicated on Congress.gov. I don't like the algorithms, but you can use that if you want. And you could tell them, this is what I'm looking for, and this is what I'm hoping you can help me with. And those type of things really do help. You can also email, you can also send snail mail, but those take months to process. And odds are, if it's a very important vote that is coming, it's best to call and tell them what you want, because that is processed immediately and they know about it immediately.
So once you touch down in D.C., have you ever met with an actual senator or congressman? Oh,
yeah. Senator Tester, we've met before. He's great. We love him. He's a Democrat from Montana, good old farmer boy. And he is a man's man. He's very, very normal, average kind of person, because he doesn't act like he's a senator at all. And he makes everybody comfortable. He's one of the best. I've met a few others after that. Senator Pat Murray, Tammy Duckworth, Representative Mark Takano. He's one of my favorite representatives because he's a huge champion for veterans as well. And so he's been doing a lot for that. He was also a acting speaker last congressional session. He was the first openly out acting speaker of the time when Representative Pelosi took a little bit of time off. It was really cool.
Wow. So you've actually met with real senators and congressmen. So when we went out there, we mostly met with people who were there, like their staff. Their staff came out.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just one person. Sometimes it's a group of people, depending on, I guess, the topic or the subject at hand. And then they would we just explained everything to them, what we thought about a particular bill or a particular legislation or a particular thing we want changed in the government or law. And then they would just give us a little bit of information so you can kind of get an idea if they were supportive or not supportive. And then they just listened for the most part. They sat there and they listened to what we had to say.
Yeah, I really think it's important also for people to call their representatives and the senators, even if they are the opposite party of you. So I'm a very progressive person. I try to stay neutral, but I do lean Democrat. And both my senators and now my representative are all Republican. And they have opposite positions on certain of specific values of mine, which happen to be, reproductive health is one of them. And so I still tell them, hey, your policies and what you're going for can technically kill me, because if I become pregnant with my medical issues that are service connected to from what happened to me in the military, I could die if I cannot have an abortion. And so those type of things is very good for them to understand. It puts a face to the policies and the things that they're looking at and trying to manage. There's a story that I remember from when Sandy Hook happened, and they were trying to pass a bill on the assault weapons ban or certain things of that at the time. And there was a very red elected official that wanted to find out, over like 48 hours, what all of his constituents had to say about that. And majority of them are very about the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. And then there was only like one or two that was like, no, I want the protection for my children so this doesn't happen. And because of that, he actually voted with assault weapons bans for more gun control because of those things. So there are people that will do that. Senator Rubio, we don't agree on a lot, but he has been doing great things for toxic exposure things for our veterans. He stood up and he stayed with the PACT Act when we had that whole debacle last year, when a bunch of Republicans changed their votes and tried to vote against it, and accused the Democrats of adding pork barrel spending, which it wasn't, because it was actually going to VA facilities for the funding. But Senator Rubio stayed with that group in trying to get that toxic exposure bill passed, and I respect him for that. So you can really get a lot of hope out of your elected officials and those type of things.
I like the idea that veteran service organizations can kind of come together over a particular topic or subject to help people understand in government what needs to be done. Because sometimes when you develop that relationship with the legislator, then you can understand how their thought process is, besides just reading their rhetoric or reading their speeches or reading their literature and things like that, their platforms, but understanding where they come from and what their understanding is of your topic. Because if you can help them understand, if you understand where they're coming from and what their concerns are, but then you have a nuance to it, you have something maybe they're not seeing or they're not able to understand or digest, you can help make that digestion easier. You can help them understand that nuance easier.
Yes, that's actually really true, because there's another reproductive health story that I remember last year. Representative Mike Bost, who's now the chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Last year, he was the ranking member because Democrats had the House last year. And he was against any of the pro-abortion measures. And it's because of things that him and his wife went through with her reproductive health and the way that it affected them, they believe, against certain things like abortion. And so trying to understand that with them of where they're coming from can really help them out and help you out and have some really productive conversations.
Do you think we're entering an era where we're getting more or less, I should say, less combative, and maybe the end of that period where it becomes just you fighting against somebody, and whoever speaks and yells the loudest is the person who walks away with the victory, other than the fact that they never passed any meaningful legislation? Do you think a do-nothing Congress will dissipate in this if we keep talking like this?
I disagree on that we have a do-nothing Congress, because at least in the last session, we got a lot of things done. We got a lot of the military sexual violence measures passed. We still have a lot more to go, but we made some strides. We were able to get more reproductive health things not passed, but at least upheld. And we did, we got the toxic exposures. We've got Solid Start to help those service members that are transitioning into the veteran community and the civilian sector community. There's a lot of things that we really got through last year. And I have a lot of hope for the next 2 years, despite the fact we have a split Capitol Hill. So the Republicans have the House and the Democrats have the Senate. But I really do think that we would still have more things to do or more things that we can get done. One of the things that, to me, that causes such a polarity in all of this hate and discontent and accusations is that a lot of people don't understand about researching things, of trying to make sure that what people are saying online is actually true, or what they're saying at podiums are factually true. And also the lack of empathy out there is really scary. And trying to help people understand more people's stories that are unlike their own can make them more empathetic. And things actually can get done a lot quicker when you have that.
Yeah, I do agree. One of the takeaways I got from people that were more, hostile to change, I should say, one thing I noticed, they really didn't understand or have a lot of connection to the other side. They really had a very, very narrow view of the entire topic. So they understood this one specific point. Who knows how well they understood that one specific thing, and they had a very specific idea that they stood behind. And because of that idea, it kind of blinded them from actually understanding the facts and understanding how things actually worked in the real world. And that's why a lot of people think that, Congress is disconnected. I mean, people think the Federal Reserve is disconnected from what's going on in the economy, because they see things through a particular lens, but they can't take a step back and look at the whole picture and see the entire thing. They're seeing it at 20,000 feet versus at the ground level.
Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes the thing is that when you're trying to make decisions like that with the Federal Reserve, to me, it's like trying to walk on a tightrope with an unbalanced bar. Mm-hmm. And those type of things, it can be really scary because the decisions you make that are so huge, I mean, they can have unintended consequences or intended consequences, but in the long run, hopefully, it worked out best. It was worth what went through with what happened. Thankfully, certain measures were passed to really pick up all the issues that happened with the Federal Reserve decisions, because they had all of those protections for those banks that other banks had paid into. Mm-hmm. So our own taxpayers' money doesn't even go into that. That way, we'll be protected.
It does indirectly, but not directly.
Yeah, a little bit, but not completely, not as much as it's happened in the past.
Because basically the banks pay a fee to be in the FDIC, and then the FDIC cartel can either raise or lower those fees. So they're going to definitely have to raise those fees, but eventually that's passed on to the consumer through higher fees at the bank level. There are legislation and new laws since the Frank Dodd Act to try to limit fees, but eventually banks are going to, customers and consumers and taxpayers are going to pay for it one way or the other.
Yeah, but it won't be as bad and as great. It's more of an even out. But with the military sexual trauma, a lot of people didn't understand what was happening, especially one specific gender. The men that happens in the military, they have a hard time understanding what really happens with at least the women, because women are more likely to be assaulted or harassed. Mm-hmm. And so, not to offend anybody, but I see Vanessa Guillen from 2020 is our George Floyd. Her whole tragedy is what really got a lot of people to talk about their stories about military sexual trauma with the hashtag I am Vanessa Guillen. And it's actually 3-year anniversary this month of her disappearing. And so when those things happen, it was kind of interesting because Congress had a hearing a couple of months later, and they wanted to hear from the inspectors general and the sexual assault prevention response program, and just to find out what's going on, because all of these stories came out on social media, and many of people of Congress has read these. Staff members had to prepare memos to pretty much screen and show their bosses what's really going on and what people are posting online. Mm. And the thing is that when we had the hearing, Representative Jackie Spear, who's a champion of this, she asked the person that was there for the Inspector General whether they have read the stories and the hashtag I am Vanessa Guillen posts, and they have not. And they didn't even read anyone's other stories to understand what was going on, except for what they got from the commanders and a few people from Fort Hood.
Wow.
Yeah. So understanding more stories and just believe that, your stories can be read. Hashtag I am Vanessa Guillen reached so many. It really helped a lot of civilian people out on understanding what's going on. For those that don't know, with the military, it's a really unique situation because you sign a contract to be inside and to work. And the thing is that when you're a civilian and you have a job, if you're being harassed or you're having a hard time, toxic situation with your boss, you can just quit and find another job, but not in the military. Because if you quit or you try to go AWOL, you'll get sent to jail.
But the situation is that even in a civilian job, even if you have the opportunity to quit, you shouldn't be forced to quit because somebody is harassing you or bothering you or doing something you should be doing. I mean, you signed up to do a job. You should be able to do your job safely without any fear or harm from your body or fear or harm that someone's going to hurt you or mess up your reputation. All those things should become as part of the regular status quo of the job. You should be able to do your job and go home and be safe.
Agreed. But with the military, there's no way. And a lot of the time, majority of the perpetrators of sexual harassment and sexual assault are higher ranking. They are usually they're either in the chain of command or they're friends with the chain of command. And the chain of command controls everything. Mm-hmm. They control when you work, where you go, whether you can go on leave to go home because they have to approve that. There's a bunch of things that they have to do, and they have to know that a lot of times they have to know what's going on with you medically. So then they make sure that you are able to deploy or do certain missions or tasks that they have to do. So there's so much control over you. It is very scary when you're put into a toxic environment and there's no way out.
Right. And then the military training command is also trying to protect itself. So they want to make sure that the narrative looks good and looks clean from the outside so that there's no disruptions or changes in what's happening, the status quo. Yes.
And sometimes chain of command still does not make the right decisions. Some have tried to make do their own investigations when there is a case of military sexual assault, which is completely illegal. It's supposed to be of the military police to do that, and they're investigator people. But the thing is that the chain of command and the commanders have control of whether to punish the perpetrator or not, despite what the investigations find. They can still pick a jury because military service members don't have the jury of our peers protection. Majority of the time they are all officers, and they can be 04 and above. I've seen mostly colonels in a jury, and they're mostly old white men, and they have no idea what goes on in the life of a person of color that is ranked E4 and below, because they very rarely have even lived that type of life. And so they don't understand what it's like to be in that position. Commanders could still choose a jury, so then they can be impartial, and they have found that commanders have not been impartial when those things happen. It's
almost like when I think about what you just said, it's almost like when I picture it in my mind, it's like if you were a person who was homeless, caught for stealing bread, and you were on trial for that, but your jury is a bunch of billionaire old money people that never had to work for a day in their life, and they're all multi-billionaires, and they're sitting there having to judge you because you stole a loaf of bread out of the local bakery when you were supposed to get it. You already paid for it, but you had to take it because they wouldn't give it to you. Now they're judging you.
Yeah. And commanders still have the control to say how a person is discharged if they are found guilty. They can make sure that they have an honorable or general discharge, and they can even make sure that they can retire without any blemish on their record. And I point these things out because we've been talking about it a lot, is because these people can also become junior ROTC and senior ROTC instructors to our children in our civilian communities. So if these people are not properly prosecuted and adjudicated, they will still be educated and eligible for doing these things. And I'm going to be pushing for investigations on those instructors that have been found guilty in the civilian communities of sex abuse on our students. And hopefully maybe they can find out if there was any abuse that was happening during their military career, because that would be really interesting. Hopefully there might be a link, because I have a strong instinct that there's a leak, because once somebody does something like that, they're caught for it. 9 times out of 10, they've done it before. They just weren't caught.
Right.
The other times.
Exactly right. And usually there's a pattern. There's a pattern in the history that's there, but then it's overlooked or swept under the carpet, or the person has protection, or they have a position or a title that gives them certain privileges so they don't get investigated to begin with.
Yes, and it's really scary because our students, especially for JROTC, because I am also a graduate and alumni of JROTC and senior ROTC, and they have a lot of time with your students. A lot of times that there's at least one formation every week, every morning before school. There's often extracurricular activities after school for an hour or two almost every day of the week, and they have you for at least 90 minutes every other day or every day. So there's a lot of extra time. And if these kids are on the extracurricular teams, they'll have them on the weekends because there's meets that they go to compete for different things, like drill and ceremony. And so they have a lot of unlimited access to our students. And I've been really lucky to have amazing instructors. And I just really am scared for those that did not.
And you understand, again, I think you mentioned this before, but there's only one or two people typically that run an ROTC program in the school. Is that right? Correct.
And it's typically one enlisted person, E6 and above, and then there's an officer. Seen as low as major, but there might be captains out there. I'm not quite sure. But I've seen them up to full-bird colonels.
So that's the problem right there. They need to have more oversight. So a lot of the things the military does is archaic, and they were designed to protect an old system. So the relics of the past that don't really even fit into today's society anymore, really. I mean, why would you just have just two people watching a bunch of kids? They can watch up to 100 kids, if I'm understanding that right.
Oh, there was 300 in my class at my school. Yeah, there was 300 kids.
So there's really no oversight. Nobody's watching these guys and make sure that they're doing things right. If somebody has a complaint, these are the only two guys that are, and typically they're men, that are actually that people can control everything. So we got to change that. We got to have more people. I mean, first of all, you wouldn't put one coach in charge of 100 or 300, athletes.
Yeah, you wouldn't. And the thing is that in the JROTC programs, they actually average around 50-50 gender-wise. Instead of like in the military, it's between 15% and 20% women. In the high school, it's 50% women or girls and 50% boys. It's right around that time frame. So it's really important to have that knowledge out there. And the schools do have control over them. They have a memorandum of understanding between the military TRADOC training commands and the school districts. So there is oversight. It's just more people need to understand what that is.
Stephanie Kalota, U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class, veteran, and founder and creator of the Veterans Legislative Voice. Thank you for your time again, and look forward to seeing what are the results finally from the D.C. Military Reproductive Health Hill Day Conference. Tell us about this when you come back.
Of course, can't wait. See you guys.
This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.